Well, Boston's luxury real estate boom has certainly changed the city's landscape, but there's a new report out that says there are some disturbing trends about who exactly is buying all those luxury units and what it's doing to inequality in the city.
The study is called The Perils of the Luxury Real Estate Boom, conducted by the left-leaning Institute for Policy Studies. And joining us now is one of the authors of this study, Chuck Collins. Chuck, thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
For this study, you looked at more than 1,800 luxury units in Boston with an average price of $3 million for these condos. And you found that more than a third of them are owned by these limited liability companies, otherwise known as LLCs. And these are their shell companies that people can use to obscure their identity when they're buying a property like this. Why are people buying them through these LLCs?
Well, part of it is you are limiting your liability. That's a good reason. But part of it is to obscure ownership. And half those corporations are incorporated in Delaware, which is kind of like the premier secrecy jurisdiction. If you want to hide money or engage in illicit activity, incorporate in Delaware.
And so in theory, these could be foreign investors from China or wherever who open up an LLC in Delaware, then pour the money into this Boston condo to house their money there, basically.
We just started to look at what we called some red flag transactions. So you see a Delaware incorporated shell company purchasing with cash an $11 million condo in a building in Boston. In other parts of the country, if we were in New York or Miami, that would trigger sort of federal oversight, but not in Boston because we're not currently being overseen by that arm of the Treasury Department.
And you point out some examples here. The Mandarin Hotel at the Pru, 51 condos sold for an average of $6.5 million, and more than half of those are owned by trusts, LLCs, or shell corporations. So what did your study find that when this happens, and you have all of this buying power that's anonymous, what does it do to the cost of housing for everyone else?
Well, I think one of the things that's happening is this isn't like our parents' generation building boom because there's so much global money. So there's sort of a global billionaire class that's looking to park their money in a safe haven. And Boston is a good market for that. So some of the demand isn't housing for people to live in. It's what we would call wealth storage units. It's like just a place to park money and hold value. And so then that has a ripple effect because there are people who are moving in from the suburbs, empty nesters, and they're buying real estate and they're affluent, but they're not able to buy in some of these rising markets, so they're kind of pushed into the neighborhoods. So there's kind of a ripple effect out into the neighborhoods.
It's kind of the Manhattanization of Boston is what people have started to call it.
And you argue that this is especially bad for Boston's income inequality, which is already pretty high. Specifically, you say along racial lines, and you cite this one statistic that I found particularly mind-boggling. In 2015, not a single home mortgage loan was issued to a black person in the Back Bay, downtown Fenway, or South Boston waterfront. The entire year, not a single one to a black family. Why is luxury housing exacerbating not just income inequality, but racial income inequality in Boston?
Yeah, and that studies, the Mass Community Banking Association looks at that every year. What I think is that we already have an enormous racial wealth divide when it comes to ownership of assets. And then you have whole neighborhoods, as you described, where the properties are so overvalued and access to credit for people of color is harder to get. So I think of this as like supercharging the existing trends, supercharging the existing inequalities that unfortunately exist in our city.
But of course, you know that some people would say, well, wait a minute, let's look back 10 years. We were all in such dire straits. The economy was in such a precarious position. All this building is great. This is great boom for the city. It's creating jobs. And you argue that the Menino administration and the current Walsh administration have, and your quote here is, permitted this explosion in luxury real estate. But what do you want them to do? It gives property taxes, it creates jobs, it brings so much positive impact to the city. How can the Walsh administration or any other really turn their back?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. This is an enormous source of jobs. It is property tax revenue. The city does a good job negotiating with developers to get some affordable housing out of each deal. I would just say we can do more. This is global wealth touching down in Boston. We could have a very high-end luxury real estate transfer tax, as they do in San Francisco and some other cities, that would actually capture some of that revenue. We could discourage vacancy with a vacancy tax, and we could require these property owners to disclose who the owners are. And I think that would help deal with the risks of illicit funds coming in and buying some of these condos.
Well, Chuck Collins of the Institute for Policy Studies, thank you so much for coming in. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much. We had so much rain today. Eric, what's up for tomorrow?
Oh,